Hello guys, and welcome to Daddy Share Space, and welcome to my shop. So it's about 6:20. I came home today and I spent my time kind of rearranging things. I cleared out up under my MFT table here because I'm trying to get a little bit more organized, and in the process of clearing out under the table, I pulled out all of my little measuring and marking tools that I've purchased over time. And I just want to kind of, give you a little bit of my experience with these particular tools, many of which I'm not super skilled with. However, they may have came with a set, and so that's how I accumulated them. And then other ones I thought was possibly a good idea, and maybe I haven't found quite as much use. Now, something that I want to talk about is right here we have this square, and just taking a closer look at it. Basically, I bought these, I believe, from Harbor Freight, and I actually have 3 of them total here. And what I ended up learning about them, and I also have this one, I believe, which is also a Harbor Freight square. As I got into this woodworking thing, I had no clue that you could go to the store to buy a square and find out that it actually was not square. That's the level of inexperience that I had, and many projects kind of went by the wayside, and I got frustrated because I didn't understand that I had purchased something that was not square out of the box. And I just was not experienced. So, but I do still have them here in the shop, and I do plan moving forward to purchase some more precision type equipment, and that's if life allows. I mean, right now the economy is getting really challenging, and I see my wife and I both have an allowance allotment that we give ourselves, and we've both noticed that things are a little bit tighter than they used to be, simply because things are going up in price. So hopefully things turn around. I remember back in 2008, I had a motorcycle accident which put me down from work. I ended up having to have surgery, and while that occurred, I actually, I had a motorcycle accident, and I discovered that I needed to have surgery. And once I had that surgery, it was right around the 2008 economic downturn. I lost my contract down in LA at that time, and I was required to be off of work for 30 days to heal up from my surgery. And by the time I entered back into the market, it was a season very similar to now, where there seemed to be job openings everywhere, but nobody was really hiring. Kind of like right now, you hear a lot of news media talking about a lot of these jobs not being real jobs. And I actually lived through that myself back then. So I got injured and fell and was down at the worst time, at least for me. Now, the benefit of that was I ended up taking a long vacation. I went to my wife's country, which is Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean, and I spent 2 months there straight. And that's I met her there, and story's written. We're now married and we have 3 daughters. Bringing this right back around, just talking about the economy. What I've learned is that during this process of doing woodworking and buying tools, the actual functional part of this, I don't look at it as a hobby. That being, repairing things, fixing things around the house, that portion is not a hobby to me. What I have discovered though over time, and you guys as viewers watching my channel probably discovered this before I did, because it really took me kind of taking a step back to recognize that the hobby part of this for me is, right now currently is collecting my, building out my Festool tool collection. Obviously nobody has to buy Festool tools, and they are quite pricey, and for me, it's not like some kind of a flex or some kind of a, it's nothing like that. It's just more of a thing where I progressed from, buying my Ryobi tools to then moving on to some Milwaukee and DeWalt tools. And in the process, I learned that everybody makes different tools. It reminds me a lot of when I was a younger man and I used to want to have, like, say, a nice car stereo in my car, and it would be like, Kenwood made the best, maybe it was an equalizer, Alpine made the best head deck, Sony made the best this, and then you had different brands making speakers. And for whatever reason, my mind was always like, I wanted everything to kind of match, everything to be kind of the same. And I find that purchasing tools is similar to that, where you can't get everything in one brand. I have a Makita, which, let's see, I think 4 total Makita tools in my shop, one of them being the drywall saw, and they're the only ones that makes that saw. Now, they make a lot of other tools, but they're the only company so far that makes that particular saw. Now, on the flip side of that coin, if you want to have, let's say, a battery-powered drywall sander, you're looking at DeWalt and Makita. Milwaukee, at this point in time, they don't make something like that. And that's when I think about buying tools and such, it's strange like that, because when I first started off buying Ryobi tools, I wanted to get a battery powered table saw and actually a battery powered 12-inch miter saw. When I started my tool collection, they didn't make either of those, and that's what kind of introduced me to the Milwaukee and the DeWalt brand. And I didn't know much about them, and so since I didn't know much about them, I decided to try both. And my wife was already doing YouTube and stuff like that, so I kind of saw a way to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, which was, well, if you buy both, you can either sell one and keep the other, and you can also make a YouTube video. And I'm happy to say that after over 2 years of doing this YouTube journey, my channel finally got monetized. So when I make these little videos, I make a few coins from just making the videos. At this point, I haven't created any kind of membership. Every now and then I'll do some Amazon affiliate things, but I'm not really super consistent with that aspect of it. Anyway, so as I was progressing through my tool purchases, I realized that when I first started buying nail guns, I started off with a Ryobi because they had the battery powered guns. I think DeWalt was out around that time, but I didn't have a lot of experience with DeWalt, and so they were more expensive. Now, the reason why I started buying the Milwaukee nail guns was because I was already in the Milwaukee system, with my original toolkit being a Milwaukee drill with an impact, a jigsaw, and a circular saw that all came in a little 5-tool bundle. I still have those tools still to this day. And so when Milwaukee started to come out with nail guns, it was around the tail end of Ryobi making all of their nail guns. So I had already collected all of the Ryobi nail guns, and over time I picked up eventually all of the nail guns that Milwaukee offers, with the exception of, say, they have a fence post nailer, and then in the future they're coming out with a 12 I believe it's a 12 amp hour battery, or a 12 volt brad nailer, and then and the roofing nailers coming down the line as well. So I don't have those 3 nailers, but all the rest of the nailers I have. Taking a look at the table here, as far as the marking devices and tools that I have in the shop, of course, the most expensive ones that I have on the table would be my TSO triangle, which I purchased, and this is the first precision type of device, aside from the parallel guides that I own. This was the first thing that I bought that was precision, if you will. And overall, I like it. I like the fact that it gives me the ability to scribe work with it, and just layout and marking. Now, what I find lacking for myself personally, as I've continue to look from afar at other precision tools, Woodpecker and also the benchdogs.co.uk brand, they make T-squares that are kind of like drafting squares. And I realized that, they come longer than this particular device. Like this, I believe is, I want to say like 18 inches. Yeah, it's about 18 inches for this. And the same thing with the benchdogs.co.uk version. It's basically the same tools, a little bit of variation in the design, but at the end of the day, they function very similarly. And I do know Woodpeckers makes one too. They make an 18 inch and a 12 inch. Now, some things that I realized that this lacks is, as I said, with the T-square, you can, scribe lines over a longer distance and having that accurate reference point with the T-square. Also with the big squares that are like this, Woodpeckers makes they have the smaller steel squares, and then they have the bigger aluminum squares. Benchdogs.co.uk has the big, I think it's maybe a 600 millimeter square, and then they also have, and theirs are the steel squares. All of their squares are the steel squares. I don't know what happened, but Woodpecker used to make I believe it's an 18 inch and a 26 inch steel square, and for whatever reason they discontinued them. My plan, if things work out, is to pick up my metric tools in the Benchdogs version, and then my standard tools will be in the Woodpecker version, because I move back and forth as far as what I use. Even right now in the shop, sometimes I'll grab my imperial tape measure, and other times I'll grab one of my metric tape measures, and it just kind of depends on the project when I decide on what I'm doing. Like a lot of things in America are imperial, and so it's a little bit easier to use that method. I'm still kind of crossing over to converting everything to metric. So if I'm making something from scratch, I kind of like using the metric. But then if something has a reference of, in inches or imperial, I like having that option as well. So maybe in the future, I may switch all the way over to using metric, because I do find it, it's pretty easy using the metric system versus sometimes using the imperial system. And getting involved in the fractions, it can, when you don't have as much familiarity, like if you're not a mathematician and you're not really doing it on a regular basis, it's not as familiar as just using the metric system. Regardless, I feel fairly confident in using either system at this point in time. I do notice that some may say, well, why wouldn't you just go with metric altogether? Well, that's a good question. And whenever I'm thinking about working in my shop and doing things, one of the things that I take into my mind when I'm thinking about why I purchase a tool is, what are the capabilities of that tool? I see the benefit in using metric measurements. I also see the benefit in using imperial measurements if necessary. Now, obviously you could use either or. One of the things that I notice is, if you go on to benchdogs.co.uk's site and just take their rulers, for example, they have different sizes of rulers. I can't remember the numbers, the lengths off the top of my head, but I'm gonna guess and say like 320 millimeters, maybe like 640 millimeters, and then 940 or 960 millimeters in length, right? Now, when you take that comparison and you go to woodpeckers.com, you can buy their rulers in both metric and in imperial. If you buy their ruler set in imperial, you can get a 49.5-inch woodworking rule, which would give you the ability to scribe a line with their little hook edge that will be like a lip that you could take on and off on the ruler, and you could scribe all the way across a 4-foot piece of plywood. I see that as beneficial, because once you take your track saw, say I was to put a full sheet of plywood on my MFT here, and I run my circular saw down to give me a square edge on one side, and let's say I want to mark out different sections and I want it to go all the way through to the other side of that sheet. Well, when I look at the Benchdogs offerings, they don't make them that long. I don't know why. And it's the same thing when you look at, let's say they make a 26-inch square like this, the aluminum one, not the steel one anymore, and I'm speaking about woodpecker. They make a 26-inch, but if you look at their metric version, it's 600 millimeters. That's the largest. If you look at benchdogs.co.uk's longest measurement, it's 600 millimeters. So for some reason, the metric versions are smaller. So if you want to have something that's going to give you a little bit more range, it seems to come in imperial. I don't know why that is. That's just something that I found. And that's where, as I said, going back to this triangle, I like using it because it gives me my square edge here to reference off my material. However, I can only get 18 inches. So when you go and look at, say, common cabinet sizes, because I've mentioned many times when I'm thinking about building, I like to have everything together. I like to have everything I need so that it's just a systematic process. And obviously being a novice, I don't know what everything is that I'll need. But sometimes when I'll start to build a project or start to do something, then I see all the deficits. Now I know that there's more than one way to skin a cat. There's more than one way to do things. I understand that. But I kind of feel like being a novice, it's so much easier to go in a straight line than it is to, zigzag all over the place. When you have a lot of experience, and I'll tap into my experience as a registered nurse with this example. As a registered nurse who's worked at 30 plus hospitals across 4 states, I don't have to have everything laid out for me. Right? Because I've worked in different hospital systems and I've done things in so many different ways, it's easy for me to adapt. It's easy for me to actually basically bend my skills to suit the situation. However, if I can understand when I come in contact with like a younger nurse, one that doesn't have quite the experience, they will be more robotic and meticulous about doing things in a very specific way because that's the way they learned it, and sometimes it's very difficult for them to go outside of that pattern or that flow. And what it shows, using again nursing, my nursing background, what it shows is they don't have a complete understanding of the craft, right? The more experience you become with something, the more you can see it from multiple angles. When I talk to my wife, I tell her all the time, it's like when you think about having complete grasp of a concept, if someone was to say, take this square and, put a sheet of paper over it, right, over part of it, anyone that's experienced with what this square is, they would be able to deduce the square is under the paper. On the flip side of that coin, we don't necessarily understand that, when a person doesn't have a full grasp of something, like say for instance, if you were to tell your child who had no experience, go get the red square for me, right? And let's say there was a sheet of paper covering part of this triangle. They would be looking around and looking around and looking around, and they may grab all kinds of different things. Why? Because this is a square, and carpenters know this is a square. It's a speed square, in fact, but it's actually a triangle. So if you're talking to someone like a child who doesn't have the experience, and you tell them, you use the terms, the correct term for the device, and you didn't say give that child that terminology that this is a square. You didn't teach them this is a square, this is a square, and even show them in different formats and different forms, like there's more than one way to get to the goal, basically meaning like, okay, if they walked over here and they looked at this whole table and I said, get me a square, they may be looking for a while and determine, well, I don't see a square on this table. I see some rectangular shapes, I see some rulers, but I don't see a square, because by definition, we know a square is, equal-sided kind of rectangular object. But in carpentry, this is a square, this is a square, this is a square, and this right here is a square. Now, all of these different squares perform different functions, and these are things that I had to learn for myself over time, and trying to tie this together. As I've been working on my projects, and I think about the common dimensions of a cabinet. If I want to learn how to make cabinets, Well, I can make a cabinet any shape and size that I want to. I was working on a CDX cabinet, which this stuff is still back over there. And what I realized is, being that novice, being like that child that doesn't understand what a square is, sometimes I think I underestimated how doing something exactly how it's always been done, how much knowledge that gives you, and how you must learn the foundation before you can move on to being a little bit more creative with your designs. I think up to this point, even though I bought a lot of very expensive tools here, I think that I've lost sight of the fact that you must first crawl before you can walk. And I think with my designs, I've been trying to create what's in my head without understanding some fundamental things, whether it be about machine safety and then also obviously basic building. Now, fortunately, I wouldn't say my MFT table that I built here is all that great. It is functional and it has done what I wanted it to do. Yet, if someone was to come here to my garage and look at it, they would see all the flaws. They would see all the imperfections. Now, I could have bought the plans from, because this is kind of a Ron Paulk type of design. But when I looked at his design, I couldn't pull the trigger on the plans because I knew I wanted something different. Now, this is what I mean by my skill set is not at the level where I can make a perfect Ron Paulk bench, because that would require practice. But yet my functional mind says, why would I make a Ron Paulk bench if my goal is to simply be able to take a track saw like this and to be able to, after I made my cut, to be able to set it underneath the table. Because you know, a lot of times, like if I'm using my Festool MFT and I make a cut, I'm sitting there with my saw in my hand wondering where I'm going to set it down. And a lot of things I find have been like that in my woodworking journey, where I start off trying to do one thing and it's like I can only see a small portion. I can't see, it's like looking through a mailbox. I can't see the big picture. And I'm learning slowly that it's only through working with the wood and working with the tools, that's the only way that I'm going to be able to kind of get the big picture. I know this is going to be a long journey for me. And, you know, tying it back into, you know, like say the economy, it's like I'm hoping, right? We don't know, but I'm hoping that the economy kind of levels out a bit and things get a little bit better, not just for myself, but for all of you and for everybody in the world. Because, you know, if things, you know, continue to taper off, then a lot of us are going to be going through some really hard times. You know, it is what it is. But if things do kind of level out, just sharing with you here on the channel, I plan on getting some more sophisticated measuring and marking tools, because I see the benefit in having smaller devices to mark small things. I see the benefit of having multiple square sizes. I see the benefit in having some things that are adjustable, so that you can make multiple different types of markings. I did get a question down in the comments of one of my videos where, well, someone said that they were surprised that I don't own any, like say, woodpecker's tools. Honestly, I can say I have a very simple answer in regards to that. I don't have a lot of woodpecker's tools simply because every time I decide to pull the trigger on a particular woodpecker's tool, well, first and foremost, there's a weighing thing here. Like, just being honest, I like, you know, power tools over marking tools. That's just, you know, I fancy those more than the others. But as I've gathered a wide variety of power tools, now I see the benefit of going back and revisiting the marking tools so that I can get more precision in my marking and just make things a little bit better. As I said, because I've purchased things like this only to learn that they're not square, and thus forth, it's hindering the overall results. So, and then, you know, even though I purchased something like this, you know, this could be overkill for a small project, but it's not adequate for a bigger project. I.e., like if you bought, even if you get the 26-inch square, it's like this, right, from Woodpeckers. As I said, they only make it in the aluminum format, so you can trace lines and draw across, but what you won't be able to do is like what you can do with the bench dogs, where you take your pencil and go through the slots, very similar to something like this device here, which is an Incra device and be able to mark lines down your material. Like I said, I don't know why they stopped making the stainless steel one, but they did. So like if you think about the common dimensions of a cabinet, I don't have them in my mind. I've looked it up before, but right now at this time I'm not able to recall it. But I know certain cabinets are 18 inches, certain cabinets may be 30 something inches, or whatever the case may be. And I see the benefit of being able to have layout tools that give you the ability to get all those inches. Like if I'm using a piece of stock that's 20 inches wide, well, this particular thing is only going to go, 18 inches. Now, of course, you could potentially take it up and put it on the other side and scribe a line back the other way. That's a possible way of doing it. However, some things that I've learned in this woodworking journey is like there's a process to working sheet goods. So if I put a piece of plywood up here, I cut down one end because a lot of people swear that end is not square. So I follow suit with that, and I understand if I put my track on there and I cut a straight edge, it may not be perpendicular to the other side of the cut. So if I take the square and I put it on this side of the cut and draw a line, say halfway across, and then I put it on the other side to draw a line back the other way, the line is probably not going to meet up unless once I cut this line, the length of the plywood to get my one good edge, I either have to fully machine it out. Let me see if I can remember the process. So you cut a line down one edge of your plywood. Once you cut that line, then you take your right angle square, which is like one of these particular devices. This one actually has the ability to get angles. And then you have the TSO version. And then this is a DeWalt. This one works with the DeWalt track saw made by benchdogs.co.uk. And then finally a Festool branded TSO version. So that once you've made your lengthwise cut, then you'll come back, you'll put this on your rail, and then you'll make a cross cut across your material to give you two perpendicular, did I say that right? Yeah, perfect. So actually before when I said perpendicular, I meant parallel. Let me rewind that. So if you cut along this line and then you don't cut the far end and you try to say take your triangle and put it on one side and then come back and put it on this side, because both sides are not parallel, you will not be able, when you make that line across, it's not going to meet up. On the flip side of that coin, okay, now getting back to where I was, so if you cut along this line here, that's going to give you a straight edge, and then you butt up your triangle or this rail square up to the end with your saw track, and then you cut along with your reference to the side that's closest to you, and then you actually create a perpendicular line. So basically you're creating a square like this with your material. So the first cut goes across here, and then the perpendicular cut is 90 degrees this way going up this way. And so then from that portion you would cut your, like whatever, like say if you needed a 20-inch cut, you would go 20 inches over, 20 inches over, 20 inches over to get that down. Or you could potentially, like say if this was your piece of plywood, say, fill in the blanks here, you would have to, from this portion, this corner, which is your 90 degree, you would measure over and cut all the way down your material. And then you would measure over again and cut all the way down your material. This represents the 8-foot portion of your work. And so that would be like a ripping cut, whereas this is going as a cross cut. Now, let's say you decide to do the cross cut. So you've got a square edge on the back part of your plywood and a square edge on this side, perpendicular 90. As you cut this way, this end is not square, right? So this is where you would cut your final dimension and cut your boards to their proper width or length, whatever you would call this dimension. I bring that up to say when I'm thinking about stuff like that, it's like you could actually, if I take this again, and let's say this is just a crude example. Let's say the benchdogs.co.uk square is just a representation, is only this long. So you go down here, so that means you can only scribe a line to this portion. You can't go all the way across, right? So this is represents like the 600 millimeter. Well, if you get, let's say, the woodpecker square, and you put it on the same portion, it's going to get you closer to the end. That's fine. However, the problem with this is, let's say your cabinet needs to be the full depth of this. Well, that's not going to give you that cut, right? This is not going to give you that depth of cut. So this is my long-winded way of saying, when I look at these different marking tools, there's a place for the 18-inch, which will get you to a certain degree. There would be a place for the 26-inch square that will get you to 26 inches. There would be a place for the 600 millimeter, which will get you 600 millimeters into your cut. But then there would also be a place for, if you look at the woodpecker's rulers, I'm going to tie it back into the rulers. The woodpecker's ruler goes 49.5 inches, and it offers a device that fastens to the end like a lip, like on this device, which means you could butt it up to your work and scribe a line all the way to the other end. So after you cut your line all the way down to make your plywood square, you can now, referencing one side, draw a line all the way to the other side. Now, some people will say, well, you don't need to do that, which is true. But when I think about it, it seems like a decent thing to do. It seems like, okay, that particular set of rulers, if you get all of them, I think there's 4 or 5 in the set. They have a short one, a really short one, maybe a 12-inch or a 6-inch or something, and then it goes up in increments all the way up to 49.5. I think that would be very nice to, after you've made a straight edge here, you butt the ruler up to the edge, and then you just scribe a line all the way across. It just seems like a simple step. And at $259 for the whole set of rulers, that would give you the ability to take a small ruler, like their smaller ruler like this, and make little marks if you needed to, but then you could take your longer ruler and do something like scribe all the way across. They don't seem to make triangles like this that would go all the way across a 4-foot table. They don't seem to make squares like this that will go all the way across, a 4-foot table. Now maybe that's not, a adequate way of looking at that. Maybe that's not, like most woodworkers that are experienced are probably like, you don't need that, because they're like me as a nurse, very experienced, and they understand all of the ways to get around and to get to the same goal or outcome. Whereas for me, the simple thing is if I want to scribe a line all the way across, if I just buy that tool, then I have the ability to do it. No fuss, no muss. If I need to make a cabinet that's 26 inches deep, then why would I futz around with something that's 18 inches and have to make the steps a little bit more complicated for like a novice woodworker? Because as I said, first, you see I even got parallel and perpendicular confused. So imagine, if I'm trying to make a serious project, which is another reason why I've talked a lot about not really wanting to go down the plywood route as much at this time and wanting to kind of make panels out of 2x4s, is because, okay, first step, put plywood on the table, cut down down one end. Next step, cut a perpendicular 90-degree edge, and then everything that you measure has to be off of that edge. And then the final cut would be you cutting off the far end, cutting your boards to proper length, right? All of these are different, stages and steps in the process of making anything in your shop if you want it to be close to square. Now, right here, this is an Incra. It says it's 18 inches. The 18 inches goes up to right about here. So then you have this extra portion on the end here, which maybe that's another inch potentially, which would make this a total of 19 inches. Now, when I bought this, I thought I bought the whole set. I bought, what is this, 1, 2, so I've got the small one, I've got this one, 6-inch, 12-inch, and this one here is the 18-inch. I even bought the little rulers that go with it, and even the corner rulers, which are all, you know, they seem to be great. I don't use them like I thought I would, and let me tell you why. If you're working with rough lumber like 2x4s that are not milled and smooth, when you pull out a 0.5 pencil and put it in here and you draw it across rough stock, it's going to be a nightmare, because you need the 0.5 lead to go into these slots to mark and use these properly. And if you're not using, like, say, finished plywood that's nice and smooth, or better quality plywood, all you're going to do is break the lead off time and time again. Some of the things I noticed with when you buy, like, say, a woodpecker's square, it looks like the diameter of the holes are a little bit bigger so that you can put in a larger size pencil. So the diameter of the lead, which means that you can mark rough lumber as well as, you know, nice smooth plywood. So I learned by default that, okay, if I want to work with 2x4s and do all that, before I can even really use this, I would need to mill up those 2x4s so that they're not rough, so that I'm not just breaking pencil lead every time I try to mark up a project. And then when I go to reach for these less expensive devices, I mark up, and then when I go to assemble, it's not square. Why? Because I had no clue that this was not square. Then you have, you know, devices like this, and it's just amazing to me how you can get all these different devices of, you know, different ways to measure and mark. I have this thing here, I don't even know what you call it. You have all these different types of tools that seem great in theory, but if you get something that's not square, you're just not going to get the experience that you was hoping for, that you were planning for. And so that's made me have to go back to the drawing board. So, like, even though I could, you know, I bought these Milwaukee ones, I've actually tried my best to test these. These are not 100% 90, right? This one here, this benchdogs.co.uk, this is the only precision small triangle that I have, and you see it's got a unique design because it doesn't have the typical point on this end, so you can use it for different things like setting the height of your router bit and so on and so forth. This has been pretty cool. However, you know, as I say, when you go from one size to the other, it's not as convenient. If you're working only on smaller projects which only require this, then it's great. If you're working only on projects that require a device this size, that's great. But using something like this regularly for something that can take this is extremely cumbersome. And using something like this where you're using it for something bigger, I've also found to be equally frustrating. This is just my personal testimony. Like, as I say, I know other people see things differently. They move differently and they make different choices, and that could be my inexperience speaking. But the reality of the matter is, I can see a place in my shop for the higher end marking devices. But as I may have mentioned before, and as I'm going to mention now, my issue is every time I go to order, there's always like some kind of a back order or wait list. And you know, when I want to say, if I want to build a project this weekend, and I go online and I look and I say, I want to buy the woodpecker square like this. Let's say the 26-inch aluminum square. And I look and it says, oh, sold out. Expected to ship by September or October. It's July. If I'm trying to build now, if I'm trying to benefit now, I don't look at this like a 401k or some kind of investment where basically it's like everything's that far down the line. So for me, when I find myself wanting to use a product like this, like, I'm not speaking against those high-end devices, but when I find myself wanting to use something like this, I'm like, okay, let me buy it now. Like right now, if I say, oh, I want to buy this Festool drill, I could just go over to my local Hartville Hardware, or well, I don't have a Hartville Hardware here, but basically, like if I order it on Amazon, I could get it through Hartville Hardware, or I could go to my local Woodcraft, and I can get that instant gratification and accomplish what I need to accomplish. I don't feel like I'm yet at the place where I see it beneficial to spend, because some of these squares and devices can be $300, $400, $200, whatever, for one item. And when I look at how much I've used this triangle by comparison, I don't regret buying this triangle at all, or the other one. When I need it, it's perfect. But it can be, with my inexperience, it can be a bit confusing to understand what you should buy first, because what you should buy is based upon what you're building at that time. And if you're building something today, you want the device to do that job today. You don't want it 2 months from now, 3 months from now, or to be put on some kind of a waiting list. You want it when you buy it. You want it to come within a week, couple days, whatever the case may be. And ironically, like I said, if I wanted to buy this square from Woodpecker, it would be, out of stock. If I decided, I want to buy the rulers, out of stock. When I was looking at benchdogs.co.uk, looking at the setup blocks, at that time, out of stock. At one point in time, benchdogs.co.uk had their ruler set where you could buy them all in a bundle, very similar to Woodpeckers. But around the time when I went to look at it, out of stock. And I'm not, when you're talking about tools like these, I feel better about pre-ordering something that's never been out, right? I don't feel quite as good about pre-ordering something that's been out, that's a known product, a known thing, like but I do understand it. It doesn't make business sense for them to make a lot of these, expensive devices and just have them sitting in the shop. It seems like these companies kind of batch out their orders. They'll like make a whole bunch of them and then sell them out, and then maybe they switch all the machines over to make some other type of machine or some other type of product. And so you kind of have to get in where you fit in. I just think that I'm not yet at the place where I'm as patient as I need to be to buy those types of tools, because if I decide I want it today, or in the near future, I want to buy it and get it. I don't want to buy, how is it going to help me 2 months? If I want it today, it's not 2 months from now, is not acceptable for me. For me to buy something like that, it really has to be like disposable income that, almost like, in a way like you were investing. When you put money in a stock, you put it in a 401k, you put it there, you're not expecting to get a return that day. You're not expected to do anything with it at that moment. When I'm buying tools and equipment, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for, let's get it done now. I'm not looking, for a 6-week tool, 6-month tool. As I mentioned before on the channel, that's the reason why I was weighing, should I buy a Bird Sheelix head for my dual planer, or should I buy the Rikon planer that already has a type of cutter head similar to my Rikon joiner? Well, when I look at the Bird Sheelix, it says like 20% of the orders will be delivered like within 1 to 2 weeks. Another 20% is like, maybe like 4, longer than that. And then like the greater portion of all of them is delivered like 6 weeks later or something like that. And I'm like, well, even if they don't charge your card until they ship it, so many other things could happen. So many other things, ideas can come into your head in that time frame. So, that requires, I guess, patience. But, my mind is always moving, and I'm thinking, okay, let me do this. If I can't do option A, I'm going to do option B. And so, I can't spend the same, dollar twice. So if I look to a Woodpecker or benchdogs.co.uk and it's not available right at that time, then I'll take that money and I'll allocate it to something else, maybe buying a tool. And then now that money's not available, so, there's that. So I think, to summarize, basically it's always been about the availability of the tools is something that I find challenging. it would be nice if they actually, had the tools available and ready to ship when you ordered them, and that you could get them like within a week, maybe two. But I think waiting months for delivery, at least at the stage that I'm at right now, it's not something that I'm super hyped about. It's not to say that I would never do it, but as I'm speaking to you about, the economic challenges, we have to make choices that make sense for us with our money. And as I'm doing projects and doing things here in the shop and trying to move forward and growing in my skills, I want something that's gonna help me today. I'm not worried. I may not even be here, 2 months from now. That's true of all of us. So it's not as easy for me personally to get excited about a product that's that far down the line. Anyways, guys, I'm rambling. I will talk to you in my next one. Take care.